Welcome to another speaker series as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. We have an amazing guest joining us today, but before my colleague Lydia introduces him, I just wanted to take a second to introduce myself, as I know we have both Red Sox Scholars and RBI who are joining us today. My name is Nick, and I'm the program specialist at the Red Sox Foundation, overseeing our baseball and softball programming. But you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from our esteemed guest, so Lydia, take it away.
Awesome, thank you. You'd think by now I'd be used to making sure that I am off mute. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited to introduce our guest today. My name is Lydia Zayas. I am the program specialist and I run the Red Sox Scholars program. So we're really excited to have you on here today. Quincy is the vice chair and president of Eastern Bank. He is the former president of Citizens Bank. He is committed to supporting the community where he lives and works with a focus on equity and youth. He's a founding member of the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund, and he also serves on a lot as board of directors on several nonprofits, many that you will all probably know about. I can probably speak about just that for 30 minutes. But with that being said, I'm so excited to introduce Quincy Miller. Quincy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and spend some time with all of you.
Awesome. So I think to just kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So first, I'm not from Massachusetts. I don't think I have an accent, but maybe you think I do. I'm originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which most of you, how many of anybody actually heard of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania before? Some of the adults in the room, I guess, but I'm sure everybody's heard of Hershey, Pennsylvania, and Hershey chocolate. Yeah, so it's literally right next to Hershey. I actually worked at Hershey Park as a kid. I grew up in Harrisburg. Harrisburg is similar to, how many of you know Brockton? Locally, Brockton, Harrisburg is similar to Brockton. So I was raised by a single mother. I grew up in the inner city of Harrisburg. And I think as as a lot of, kids at that age, I was involved in sports, and, my real aspiration was to be able to be an NFL football player someday. So I played a lot of sports as a kid, mostly football and basketball. And I ended up getting the opportunity to go to college on a football scholarship. So I was the first person in my family to ever go to college. No one ever really talked about going to college in my family because no one had ever really done it before, except for the fact of being able to go to play football. And so that's ultimately how I ended up at a school in Pennsylvania called Lafayette College, where I did play football and played for all 4 years. And I studied economics and business there, different finance things. Nothing really sort of teaches you how to become a banker. So I didn't know. By the way, nobody who's growing up decides they want to be a banker. It's like, it sounds like the most lame industry to ever go into. Like, people want to be, doctors or teachers or police officers or, all kinds of things, but no one ever says I want to be a banker. And so I never planned to be a banker either. But I studied business and finance in school, played all 4 years. Was the captain of the football team my senior year. And then I actually got the opportunity my senior year after I was finished to actually go to the Giants, the New York Giants, as a free agent. But at the time, I had already gotten my offer to be able to join a bank called M&T Bank. And so I had to make the decision whether I was going to go try to, go after that dream, play professional sports, or if I was going to take the banking job. And so I decided to take the banking job, which, you may think like, why would you do that? But for me, I really didn't have many other options. My mother by that time became disabled and had multiple sclerosis. And so she was really living on, what they call Social Security disability. And I had this great opportunity to have this job that, because of my college education, I was actually going to make more salary in my first job than my mother had ever made in her entire life. And so I gave up on the dream to become a football player because it was too much risk. And I took what I thought was the safe path, was to become a banker. And here I am now, 24 years later, the president of Eastern Bank here in Boston. So happy to fill in the gaps and talk a lot more later, but that's sort of how I got to where I am here today. So as I sit here today, as I said, I'm the president of Eastern Bank. Also, I am married. I have 2 children. So I have 2 teenage girls. They are 13 and 15. So probably in the same age range as all of you. They think I am the lamest dad on the planet. And so you all may have the same thing, with your parents. I know with my mom, I was always telling her that, I'm never going to be like you to be when I'm a parent. And well, here I am. My kids say the same thing to me. And, this is what parents do. But I think, we do a pretty good job. And so I have 2 girls, 13 and 15. Their names are Kyla and Taya. We have, and then we have all kinds of animals and pets at my house. We have 2 cats. We have now 3 dogs, and we have a fish tank. So that's a lot about me.
That's awesome. And I do want to just call out how crazy of a small world we do live in, because Quincy, as you said, you grew up in Harrisburg, and my parents live in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, so just south of Harrisburg, very small town for our scholars in vRBI to understand. But both him and I are now in Boston working. So again, just a small town or small world that we live in, and just kind of the connections that you guys will see as you progress in your lives, and understand that there's going to be people that live close to you that you may have just met today. So very cool.
You know what, Mick? Just to add to that, Mick, my first job as a branch manager in banking, which is like the first big job. My first job as a branch manager of banking was actually in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It actually wasn't even in Harrisburg. It was in Carlisle.
Amazing. So, well, Quincy, amazing information about yourself, but I'm curious, did you, obviously we kind of heard a little bit about how you wanted to be a football player, but did you have any idea of what you wanted to do or thought you wanted to do when you were in middle and high school?
Yeah, so in high school, like I said, I always wanted to be a football player. So that was first and foremost. I think I wanted to be either football or basketball player, but I figured out that my basketball skills weren't good enough. So that's why football is what it became. But in high school, I'll tell you, the reason why I got interested in business when I went to college was actually in high school. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I took my first accounting class. And one of the things I talk about, and like, again, my girls would tell you that I preach nonstop, is the importance of doing good in school. No one really talked to me about like how important it was to do in school. Again, it was like, well, just play football, you'll be fine. And so in fairness, I should have worked harder when I was in school. I didn't apply myself to the best of my abilities, but, I still was able to get by with A's, B's, and, some C's here and there. But the one class that I took that I really liked was an introductory to accounting class. And a lot of people think like bankers have to be good at math. And I tell people I am not very good at math at all. But, banking is really only addition and subtraction. It's pretty easy. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. Now you have $2. $2 you spend, $1 you have 1. So it's not really complex math. But accounting and how you take that basic math and then apply it in a business sense actually made a lot of sense to me. Like I said, I never really understood geometry or algebra, God forbid, calculus. Oh my gosh. So my girls are doing so much better in those classes than I did. But, things like accounting came really natural to me and it made a lot of sense. And so I actually thought, well, maybe I'll become an accountant someday. And this is another story I tell. I've literally been doing my mother's tax returns since I was a sophomore in high school. I've done them every year since I was a sophomore in high school for my mother. Now I ended up getting to college and I took like a really challenging accounting class. And I said, whew, maybe accounting's not for me. And so I went more into the finance and the business side of it, which I loved, which I came to love even more.
Awesome. Well, I do want to open it up to the scholars in RBI, but I want to have one more question before we do that. With us celebrating Black History Month and us, the foundation, Lydia and myself, facilitating some of these great conversations we've been having over this past month. For you, being a person of color in your industry in the banking world, what are some challenges you have faced, and how were you able to navigate those situations?
Yeah, so first I'll start with navigating the challenges that I've faced in my industry and my career. So for the most part, not early on, but for most of my career, I've been the only person of color and the youngest person in every job I've ever had. The finance industry really wasn't diverse when I started 24 years ago. It's obviously begun to change. And so that's one sort of challenge. But actually, I'm still grounded in how I grew up. Look, I still tell people, I'm the president of the bank. And what I tell people all the time is, really, I'm just the same kid from the projects as where I grew up. I just happen to have the right opportunities, take advantage of those opportunities, take advantage of the leadership, and then continue to grow and progress in my career. And so the context that I have always kept to every challenge that I've had in business, it really comes back to my mother, right? That comment that, my mother worked in, none of you probably know what a Kmart is, but it was, Kmart before there was Walmart. And back then when my mother worked there, in the 70s, 1970s and 80s, they had a restaurant. So my mother worked as a waitress and then as the manager of a restaurant her entire career. And so, I would see my mother go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, come home from work at 8 o'clock at night. I made my own food for myself as a kid, every day, went to the Boys and Girls Club after school, stayed involved with sports. And again, so many people around me. And again, for me growing up, that was just normal because that's how all the kids grew up. And so I didn't see anything wrong or different with that. And so when I got into my career, I really always check myself anytime like I felt sorry for myself or something felt hard. I'd always say like, what are you talking about? As hard as a day that I could have or a challenge that I got to overcome, or if I felt somebody was discriminating against me because of my race or because of my age, my context always was, listen, my mother was able to do it and how hard she worked for her family, like I can't complain. I got to find a way to overcome and be able to, get past this really small obstacle. I'm not dealing with, things that my mother dealt with, like how to put food on, the family's table and how to keep the electric bill paid. I mean, those are things that, and I'll give you just one more story as we open it up. People often, you ask like how I could get to be a banker, but what I tell people is I actually had a moment in college that was a defining moment for me because in fairness, my first 2 years in college was sort of like my years in high school, which is, I did okay, probably didn't apply myself as much as I needed to apply myself, but I did enough to get by. And so, by my second year in college, I had a 2.8 GPA. For those of you who are in high school or getting ready to go to the high school, I'm not sure what grade everyone's in. And so, that's not a bad GPA by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not a rock star GPA either. And it sort of showed that, I was a little bit less than B student, B minus maybe. But then I got a job working construction during that summer. So I stayed on campus and I got a job that worked construction. And so remember, this is 26 years ago. I took the job that nobody else on campus wanted to do, because none of the people, I went to a school that a lot of people had a lot of money. Like, no one was going to take that job and go jackhammer on the concrete streets and, do all the grunt work and shovel stone. Like, no one wanted that job. So I took it because it was going to pay me $20 an hour. Now, that's like, $20 an hour 25 years ago is like saying you're going to get paid $35 or $40 an hour. So as you can imagine, I'm like, oh, sign me up for that all day long. So I took that job. I worked 50 hours a week that summer to make as much money as I could. And it was the first time in my life that I actually knew what financial freedom felt like. Like, I could go out to a restaurant and eat. I bought myself my first computer back when computers were first starting. And, like many kids, I didn't always spend the money on the best thing. I bought myself my first Gucci watch that summer, which by the way, I still have today, and it sits on my dresser. And it sort of serves as a reminder of, so it was that moment that I really said, like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe, again, look, it's not that money solves all problems. That is not the case. But as I told people, the person that says, people that say, like, money doesn't matter, that's not going to make you happy, is typically someone who already has money. And so what I learned in that moment was the freedom that it created for me economically, that job. And so that's, from that day on, I'm like, I'm going back to school. I'm gonna compete in the classroom just like I compete on the football field. And every semester after that, for the next 2 years, I was on dean's. Essentially, I think the lowest GPA I had was the first semester after that. It was a 3.6. Every other semester, I was 4.0, straight A's. And I brought my GPA up by the time I got to my senior year. So, like, those things are what, so when you say sort of what drives you, what causes you to overcome obstacles, it was those types of experiences and sort of upbringings that have drove me forward.
Wow, what an inspiring story. I think I need to go figure out what I'm doing with my life after that story. But at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself, or if you're shy, which I know none of you are, please send it in the chat. I'll give you, oh, Sophia, you are not shy.
Okay, so what is the biggest life goal you have, like, that you haven't achieved, but you have, and it's still like in your mind?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Probably 15, 20 years ago, I went through this management training thing, and they said, okay, put down all your life goals, put them on a piece of paper and cross them off as you achieve them. I often say, I have no idea what happened to it in all my moves and changes. But, I'll tell you, as I sit here today, my biggest life goal, honestly, is to see my children graduate college. Again, this is, we can talk about this later, but I'm involved with a lot of different organizations. I'm on the board of, I'm the board of a school, or of an organization called The Bottom Line, which is about helping to get, students of color, first generation students through college. And so, my kids have grown up because of my experience being the first generation, not with the conversation if they were going to go to college, but where they were going to go to college. Now, again, college is not for everybody. But, post high school education, whether that's learning how to be a plumber or learning how to be a nurse or going to college, those things are all critically important. And so as I look forward, I mean, my real, the goal that I look for, that to me is actually the most important in my life, is to see my girls graduate high school, graduate college, get a successful job, and then be on their own. And to me, like, that, there's nothing more I could have asked for.
And I think it's important you say that. And actually, everyone here, if you're not familiar with Bottom Line yet, once you're a junior in high school, you will be. We make sure all of our scholars and vRBI players apply. But I think it's so important to hear stories like yours, because I think for people like me, and actually probably most, if not all, of our young youth on this call, like, we're the first to graduate college and to go and graduate from college. So thank you for your stories. Do we have any other questions? I have one in the chat, but if there's a brave soul that wants to unmute yourself, please do so.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Chloe.
Oh, so you said that your lowest GPA was like a 3.6 or something, right? And you've been like a 4.0 like most of the time. How did you manage to bring yourself back up? Like, were you unmotivated? Like once you dropped down, or like if you were, how did you get back up?
Yeah, so it actually went the other way, Chloe. My first 2 years, my total GPA in college was about 2.8. So it I'll tell you that the thing that I realized after working that summer job, and then after that, the lowest GPA I had was like a 3.6, but it was a three, it was all, you know, straight A's. I didn't have enough confidence in myself in the classroom. And part of that comes from, some teachers, I'm not trying to blame other people, but, growing up as a student of color, sometimes some teachers don't have enough confidence in you. And that happened to me as a kid growing up. And so what I really learned was that if I actually really applied myself with the same effort and rigor that I did in, like, on this football field and playing football, if I put in that same effort and time in the classroom, I could compete and get A's in the classroom as well. And so it was really a personal commitment and a mindset perspective that, to do this is going to take a lot of hard work. And I can't take the easy route. And there's a phrase that is an old phrase. I don't know if any of you heard it, but it's an old phrase. It's called short-term pain for long-term gain. And I really tried to keep that. When I get tired of studying, I really didn't feel like doing it. I just kept coming back to that financial freedom feeling and going, I'm going to push through it. As much as I don't want to do this, it's going to pay off for me in the long run. And that's really how I was able to raise my GPA and end up being on Dean's list and, a lot higher. I wish I would have started sooner, because it's much more, you have to start. Right? So my daughter is a freshman in high school, and I've explained this story to her, and I'm like, you have to don't start out like me. Start out doing good, and it will make it much easier, because if you start out really behind, you got to work that much harder to be able to catch up by the time you get to be a junior and senior. And so that's sort of how I learned it.
Thank you for that. I know some of our students, and I'm not saying you, but I know in general, like students right now with remote learning, a lot of students are struggling. So I think it's good to hear that right now, if it's low, just like you just have to apply yourself, and there is a chance that you can come back up on top. And Anna, I think you had a question, so I'll let you ask that.
Oh yeah, I had a question, but you touched upon it. But my question was, what is your biggest motivation?
Yeah, and so I talked about my girls, and obviously that's a big motivation. One of the things I'm most proud of is my mother. My mother is still alive. She has lived with multiple sclerosis for 35 years now. She just had a birthday last week or this week. Her and my grandmother. My grandmother's also alive. So my mother just turned 66, and my grandmother just turned 94. And both of them live in a house that I bought for them. And so that, helping my family has been a big motivation, for my life. And so that's really what I do. And the other thing that I really try to spend a lot of time on is doing things like this, which is talking to young people in the community, because and that's why I tell these stories. I've made, people look and they go, so many times you look up to adults, whether it's your teachers or other people, or, here's the president of the bank. And I just try to explain to people, like I said, like, I literally was exactly like you. And there's nothing special about me, except, as I tell people, I just try to work harder than everybody else, ultimately, at the end of the day. In doing that, I was able to continue to grow and advance. Just again, not that everything always went perfect, not that I always made all the right decisions, because that's not the way the world works. But so that's really my motivation, is to continue to support and define my family, and then give back and help other future generations to come.
Awesome. Are there any other questions? I think we might have time for one more. I know we're already running up on time. It's crazy how fast these go. Ming, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Quincy Miller. I'm Min. I am a junior this year, and I wanted to ask you, first, I wanted to thank you for coming today, and it's been quite insightful to like kind of hear you speak and like the journeys you went through, because I kind of resonate with a lot of them. Growing up in the projects, I grew up in this projects of South Boston, seeing my mom struggle with bills, seeing my mom like getting stressed out about her finances. That's my story of like why I always wanted to venture into a career in finance. Reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad was kind of like one of my stepping stones. Think and Grow Rich was also another book I read. But it just kept going. And in that journey, I became like, I worked with many youth with like finances as director of workforce and economic development for the Mayor's Youth Council. And I'm not sure, oh, thank you. And I'm not sure you're familiar with Bank on Boston, but I was an intern with them to kind of work on custodial accounts, non-custodial accounts. I actually called one of your branches, and unfortunately, they did not offer non-custodial accounts, but they did offer UTMA accounts. And the reason for that, why I fight for that, is because growing up, my mom was bad with money. So I didn't want to be in her position, and I wanted to be able to have that control on my own finances. So when I tell you I went to bank after bank after bank, asking them at the age of 15 and a half, can you open up a bank account for me? And I would get rejected every single time. Until one bank, the bank I am currently at right now, finally said yes. But as I digress, I wanted to ask you specifically on being the youngest person in the room, because when I attend these meetings, when I attend, like trying to like put myself out there, I'm more times than not, I'm always the youngest person. So I wanted to ask you, like, what do you do in that situation? Like, what questions do you ask? How do you converse?
Yeah, well, first of all, you just demonstrated it, right? Because what you just, I mean, the things that you just talked about in terms of accounts, 90% of the world doesn't even know what those are, right? And so I remember when I first got my first job, I started doing investments, and this guy told me, listen. And I was in New York City trying to sell investments to people on Wall Street. I'm like, I just got out of college. I didn't even know what an investment was like 3 months ago. And what he said to me is, as long as you know more than 1% from the person sitting across the table from you, you're the expert. And I was like, wow, that's actually pretty insightful. I give that example because, man, what you just shared about looking for the different accounts, that experience is more than, like I said, 99% of the other people. And so, I would say in today's world, being young and people, you're always going to have some people sort of look down at you. But the innovation world, the innovation economy, what young people have been able to do, there's a different lens. It's like, oh my gosh, like young people are accomplishing so many more things than what we ever did in our generations. You're like a million steps ahead of where I was at this time. So it's just what you just delivered to me is how you gain respect in an audience in a room like that, is because you went from bank to bank to bank to bank, right? And so that's how I actually leveraged, sort of my skills. I still don't. I tell people all the time, we have 1,900 employees. I bet you I don't know what 500 of the jobs are that they do. That there's just no way one person could know everything, and so. Exactly. You just demonstrate it. And that's what I try to do and demonstrate, the skills that I brought to the table, even when I was the youngest person in the room.
Awesome. That is probably the most perfect way to wrap up the fastest 30 minutes ever. I wish every 30-minute interval was like this during the workday. But Quincy, we cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Lots of students are going to have access to this video as well, besides the ones that are here today. So again, we cannot thank you enough. And with that being said, we'll just take a quick photo if that works for you.
Absolutely. And I just put my email, my work email there in the chat if I could ever be helpful, or as you're getting to your junior year and you want to know more about Bottom Line or other organizations. I'm involved with the Y. I'm involved with a whole bunch of stuff. So happy to be supportive. But I'm I even put my, it's COVID. I don't even usually wear a jacket anymore, but I figured as a banker, I might as well put my jacket on to look part of the, like a banker.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, his email is in the chat. So he's not kidding.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So wonderful to meet you. Good luck. And thanks to the Red Sox Foundation for hosting this.